Hello, I'm Kat and this is 10 minutes long, and in this video I'm going to show you how I make Mexican pasta. It is my absolute favourite Mexican pasta bake. It tastes so good. It's really like packed full of veggies. It's quite warming, spicy. It's just really good. It's quite straightforward to put together. It makes 4 portions which I then freeze. And it's about 450 calories a portion by my calculations. But yeah, it's a recipe I really enjoy, so I thought I've made it a few times, I'll share it with you guys. So you can see that I've already measured out some pasta, which is behind me. And that's like one of the first things I do is put the pasta on, because it takes like 15 minutes or something to cook, so I like that to be ready well ahead of when I need it. So you can see that I've just put some water on to boil there in the background. In the meantime, I prep 2 peppers. Now the recipe calls for orange and red, but you can use whatever colour you want, like whatever you fancy. I quite like using the 2 different colours. I don't feel like there's much taste difference really, but I probably wouldn't use green. I find them a little bit bitter. So you can see there that I'm just preparing the peppers really to chop up, because they need to be chopped up small. Kind of do that in like 2 stages because I'm a bit back and forth in this video. So you can see me there trying to work out how long the pasta will take as I finish off the peppers. This recipe does take a good, I don't know, I'd maybe say like 40 minutes to prepare, but you can probably, like I probably could have sat down, like I've got chairs right there, I probably could have sat down to do it. So you can probably find ways to make it a bit faster if you want to, like maybe buying pre-cut veg or stuff. I just prefer like to cut the veg myself. So there I've just like quartered the peppers, and now I'm preparing an onion. So the first thing you'll want to do is like fry up the onion with some garlic. So the way that I tend to do it is like to prepare all of the veg first while the pasta is cooking, and I do it before I start frying, because like really when I start frying I kind of want to be quite quick to begin with. I'll link to the recipe down in the description, but the recipe is actually like a meaty recipe, whereas I'm a vegetarian, so I'm making this with Quorn. So this is a vegetarian version of the recipe. I've adapted little things about it, like I use more garlic than it calls for, and I perform the steps slightly differently. So like it doesn't tell you to boil the pasta, for instance, until like halfway through the recipe, at which point you're like, well, I kind of need it now. I don't want to just stand there for 15 minutes watching the pasta. So the recipe that's in the description is my version of it, with all of the things that I adapt, because also I don't like really spicy food, so I actually don't put in as much spice as the recipe calls for. So in the description you'll find my version of the recipe, but I've also linked to the legitimate version of the recipe, the one that contains meat, so that you can follow that if you want, because I also use a little bit more fluids, because Quorn absorbs water. You can see here I've switched the viewing angle because my kitchen's like really weirdly laid out, so I thought if I left it where it was, you'd see me chopping veg, sure, but you wouldn't be able to see me actually cooking it. So I'm just going to try out this new angle. It's the first time I've done a cooking video in this kitchen, so it'll be interesting to see how it actually turns out in the end. Anyway, yes, so I use more fluids in this recipe than the actual recipe calls for, because Quorn absorbs liquid quite a bit. So here you can see I'm starting off by just gently frying the onions. So it's supposed to be gently frying, but I'm actually not that used to cooking on gas at this point. Not been doing it for that long, so they did get a tiny bit burnt. It was a little bit hot, so I'd say maybe you probably want it on a medium heat. And then I just crush the garlic in. And you can see that I actually just chucked the garlic crushing bit in as well. I like doing that quite often. I actually loathe garlic crushers. I feel like they're just like, they make more mess than they actually solve. I've seen the ones where you just press them and it seems a lot less messy. I would like that, but yeah, my current garlic presser works, so I'm not gonna go out and buy a new one. Anyway, you've seen I've just chucked in a whole packet of Quorn. That's 300 grams. And I also weighed out an extra 150, so that's 450 grams of Quorn. And then I'm just breaking it down and just giving it a gentle fry just to kind of like brown it off a little bit. I think if you're a vegetarian, you don't really need to fry it in this step, but I guess just breaking it down and defrosting it, I suppose, is what's involved in this bit. But you can actually just carry on, you know, putting in the stock and the passata and stuff like that if you want to, because it will just gently defrost in there. Like, it doesn't need to be fried like normal mince. But whilst that is defrosting and just slowly cooking, I'm just chopping up the rest of the peppers and just keeping on giving this a gentle stir. I suppose it helps to like really take the onion and garlic flavours in to, you know, the Quorn as well. So I've chopped the peppers here into tiny squares, and in a second I'm going to chuck that in with the rest of the Quorn, so that it has a little bit of a chance to sort of like fry with everything else. So you can see that I'm just stirring it in, just give it like a minute or two. Like, at this point you're not going to get any sort of meaningful browning, it's just going to just start to cook. And then tuck in an entire box of passata. I can't remember how many grams that is, but the recipe calls for less, but I've put in more because obviously the Quorn will just absorb it. Then you want stock. Again, the recipe calls for about 450 grams, I think, but I put in like 500, so a full stock pot. I use just like Tesco stock pots because I find that like stock cubes have a weird flavour to them. I didn't even stir it, I just popped it straight in. There's no need to stir it really. Pop in a bit of black pepper, pop in a teaspoon of salt and give that a stir. Now you kind of want that to thicken up, so what I tend to do is just kind of leave it boiling while I go and find the rest of the spices and stuff. So here you can see, first off is a tablespoon of tomato paste, and well, it's supposed to be 2 tablespoons, and what was left in that tube I thought was about right, so I just emptied that tube in and gave it a stir. Now you'll see me just popping around the corner to my spice rack, back and forth. Because I don't prepare the spices beforehand, it takes me a little while to be like, okay, here is some chilli powder, stir that in. Okay, here is some cumin, stir that in. That is a big bag of cumin. I love my big bag of cumin. I use so much of it. Anyway, I just go around and like find a spice, stir it in, go find the next spice, stir it in. This bit actually takes probably about 10 or 15 minutes or so, but I tend to do it like this rather than preparing the spices beforehand, because as you'll see, it's just like bubbling away in the meantime. So it is like thickening up, and I don't feel like I'm stood there watching it. I'm actually just going around and getting all the bits and pieces that I need. There's a teaspoon of nutritional yeast going in. That really helps with the thickening, so I usually try and put that in first, but I usually forget as well. Bit of cayenne pepper, bit of oregano. So nothing like out of the ordinary in terms of spices, but it's all a really good mix that makes it kind of spicy and warming. Once you've done that and you're happy with the thickness, you just turn the heat off and stir the pasta in. So at this point I've actually turned the gas off. The pasta that's just been sat there for a while has now been stirred in. And next is a tin of red kidney beans. You can use black beans if you want. You can use kind of any beans really, but I prefer the red kidney beans because I find that they fare better in the freezer and in the cooker afterwards as well. But I just prefer the texture of them personally, but you can put whatever you want in. Stir them in. Now I've left it kind of like on a hot hob, but the heat is actually off, so you don't want to be putting heat on those because they're quite fragile. And then I just spoon it into 4 dishes. You can see that I'm using pie dishes. The reason I do this is because, like, obviously it's way too much to eat in one serving. It does make a lot, but they fare well in the freezer. So once I've portioned it out into these 4 pots, I will wrap it up in cling film for the white pot, because that's the one that I'm going to eat this evening, and foil for the others, and I'll just chuck them in the freezer and they just freeze as normal. I then defrost them for a full day before I actually eat them. I spilt some on the floor, so I'll clean it up. So once they're there, just let them cool down for a bit and put them away. And in the style of blue pita, here's one I made earlier. So this was the one that I made in the morning. This is now the evening. I've taken it out of the fridge, unpacked it from the cellophane, and I'm just sprinkling cheese on top. So I generally put about 30 grams of cheese on each one, and that seems to be a really nice amount. And then just chuck it in the cooker usually for about 30 minutes, and the cheese all melts, and then you have a delicious